The morning bell rang softly through the corridor of St. Thomas High School. Students hurried to their classrooms, chatting, laughing, and comparing notes for the math quiz ahead. But among the noise and energy, one boy quietly walked with his head slightly down, holding a small stack of old notebooks close to his chest. His name was Arav. He was the kind of student most people didn't notice much. He sat near the back of the class, never raised his hand, and rarely spoke unless the teacher asked him to. His uniform was always neat, his handwriting small and careful, and his eyes, deep and curious, often drifted toward the blackboard even when others were distracted. His classmates didn't really understand him. Some thought he was just shy. Others whispered that he was too quiet to ever stand out. But inside Arav's mind, there was always a quiet storm, patterns, numbers, and shapes swirling together like pieces of a puzzle waiting to fit. That morning, their math teacher, Mr. Rahim, walked into class holding a thick stack of papers. He was a kind man in his late 40s, always with chalk dust on his sleeves. "All right, everyone," he said, smiling. "Today, we're going to do something a little different." The students groaned playfully, expecting another difficult test. Mr. Rahim turned to the board and began writing an equation so long that it almost reached the edge of the chalkboard. "Now," he said, tapping the chalk. "This question here. I've used it for years. It's one of those problems that look simple at first, but every time you try to solve it, you end up going in circles. Even I've never quite managed to make sense of it completely." A few students laughed, thinking he was joking. But Arav's head lifted slightly. His eyes narrowed as he stared at the equation. The board was filled with numbers, roots, fractions, and letters. It was messy yet beautiful, a challenge that seemed to call to him silently. Mr. Rahim continued, "Now don't worry. I'm not expecting anyone to solve it. Just look at it and see if you can simplify it somehow. Think of it as an exercise in logic." He smiled again, but Arav's heart began to beat faster. Something about that equation looked familiar. Not because he had seen it before, but because it felt like something he had been unknowingly thinking about all along. A pattern he had noticed in his old notebooks. As the class began copying the problem down, Arav's pencil moved faster than usual. His hand trembled slightly. Around him, the noise of classmates whispering faded away. For him, the world narrowed to that one piece of chalk on the board, and the way the numbers seemed to connect like hidden threads. After class, when the bell rang, everyone rushed out to lunch. Arav stayed seated, his notebook open, still lost in thought. Mr. Rahim noticed him. "Arav," he said gently, "you can go have your lunch, son." Arav looked up, startled. "Sir, this equation, it doesn't seem wrong. It just seems incomplete." Mr. Rahim smiled kindly, a little amused. "Incomplete, huh? Well, maybe. But even university students struggle with it. It's one of those unsolved kinds, you know. Just a tricky one for fun." Arav nodded slowly, though inside his curiosity deepened. He didn't think it was unsolvable. He thought maybe everyone had been looking at it from the wrong angle. That night when he got home, he placed his school bag on the floor and went straight to his desk. His house was small, the walls a bit cracked, the furniture old, but it was quiet. His mother called from the kitchen, "Arav, dinner's almost ready. Don't start studying yet." He smiled faintly and said, "Just 5 minutes, Amma." But those 5 minutes turned into hours. He opened his notebook and rewrote the equation. He studied it line by line, breaking it down, trying patterns, moving terms around, and rewriting them again. The sound of the ceiling fan filled the silence. His pencil scratched across the page as if his thoughts were racing faster than he could write. The numbers didn't seem random to him. They had rhythm, like a song that only he could hear. At one point he got up, poured himself some water, and stared at the notebook again. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in, but his focus was sharper than ever. His father, who worked as a small repairman, peeked into his room and said softly, "You're studying again?" "It's late, son," Arav nodded. "Just finishing something, Papa." His father smiled tiredly. "You always are." The next day at school, while others talked about cricket or music, Arav spent his breaks scribbling new ideas. He wasn't even sure what he was searching for, only that the equation had become a part of his thoughts. He couldn't ignore it. When Mr. Rahim saw him bent over his notebook again, he approached and said, "You really took that problem seriously, didn't you?" Arav looked up and replied softly, "It just doesn't sit right, sir." "I think it can be simplified," Mr. Rahim chuckled. Well, you're free to try, but don't lose sleep over it. But Arav already had lost sleep over it. That evening, while most of the town went quiet under the orange streetlights, Arav stayed awake. He erased the same line again and again. Every time he thought he was close, one small part of the logic didn't fit. But he didn't give up. He began thinking differently, not from what the textbook said, but from what made sense to him. He used shapes, drew circles and lines to visualize how the equation behaved. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It was like watching a system of moving parts that he had to balance perfectly. Hours passed. His hands were smudged with pencil marks. His eyes were heavy, but his mind was still bright and alive. He tore out another sheet and started fresh. Then sometime near midnight, something clicked. He noticed a symmetry, a hidden connection between two terms that no one else had mentioned before. His fingers froze on the page. He checked it once, then again, then a third time. It worked. The logic held. The equation that had seemed impossible finally balanced perfectly on both sides. Arav leaned back in his chair. His heart was pounding, not with excitement, but with disbelief. Could it really be right? He stared at it for a long time, afraid that maybe he was imagining it. Finally, he closed his notebook carefully, as if it were something fragile. He whispered to himself, I think I solved it. But when he looked around his small, quiet room, there was no one to tell. No one who would understand what it meant. So he smiled faintly to himself, placed the notebook beside his bed, and lay down staring at the ceiling until sleep slowly came. The next morning, the sky was gray, and the wind carried a cool breeze. Arav walked to school quietly, clutching the same notebook. His steps were slow, not because he was nervous, but because his mind was still replaying every step of his discovery. When he entered the classroom, his classmates were laughing about something else entirely. None of them noticed the quiet boy with the worn-out notebook sitting in the back, waiting for the right moment. He didn't know if anyone would believe him. He didn't even know if Mr. Rahim would take him seriously. But deep inside, he knew something had changed. He had seen something no one else had seen, and for the first time, the boy who always stayed silent felt a voice growing inside him. A quiet, steady voice that whispered, maybe it's time to show them. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the classroom window as Mr. Rahim walked in with his usual smile. Students were chatting, some flipping through their books, others half asleep. But at the back of the class, Arav sat with his notebook open, his pencil quietly tapping against the desk. His mind wasn't in the room. It was still lost somewhere inside that equation, the one he had finally solved the night before. He looked at the board where the same equation still faintly remained, half erased from yesterday. The chalk marks glimmered under the light, like a puzzle daring him to speak up. When Mr. Rahim began the lesson, Arav hesitated. His heart was beating faster than usual. He wanted to tell his teacher, but something inside him held back, a small voice that said, "What if I'm wrong?" He had spent hours checking his solution, rewriting it again and again. It made sense every single time. But still, the thought of raising his hand, of everyone staring at him, made him nervous. He waited until the class ended. When the bell rang and the students began rushing out, Arav quietly walked to Mr. Rahim's desk. "Sir," he said softly. Mr. Rahim looked up, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, Arav? I worked on the equation you gave yesterday." The teacher smiled faintly, amused. "Ah, that one? The unsolvable monster? Don't tell me you actually tried it." Arav nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I found something." Mr. Rahim blinked, surprised. He didn't expect that. "Found something? What do you mean?" Arav hesitated, then carefully pulled out his worn-out notebook and opened it to the page filled with his handwriting. Neat columns of numbers, lines of reasoning, and boxed steps that led to one final, clear solution. "I think this is the answer, sir," Arav said quietly, sliding the notebook across the desk. Mr. Rahim took it, still smiling, but as his eyes moved line by line over the page, his expression slowly changed. His brows furrowed. He turned a few pages back and forth, checked the equations, then rechecked them again. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Arav stood nervously, his fingers gripping the strap of his bag. Finally, Mr. Rahim looked up, speechless. "Arav, this is not wrong." Arav blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. "Sir?" Mr. Rahim leaned back in his chair, staring at the notebook as if he couldn't believe it. How did you do this? Arav shrugged slightly. I don't know, sir. I just tried to look at it differently. Everyone was simplifying it one way, but I tried to balance the middle part instead. And then it worked. Mr. Rahim's lips parted in disbelief. He had seen thousands of solutions in his career, but this was something else. It wasn't copied or guessed. It was clean, logical, and beautifully reasoned. He tested one part mentally, then another. It all aligned perfectly. Mr. Rahim stood up suddenly, pacing a little. Arav, do you realize what you've done? This isn't just solving a question, this is a completely new approach. You found a link no one talks about. Arav's heart began to pound faster. He didn't know what to say. For him, it had just been curiosity. But now, seeing his teacher so moved, he started to realize it might be bigger than he thought. Sir? He said softly. Was it really that hard? Mr. Rahim smiled and shook his head slowly. It's been a riddle for years, Arav. Even I couldn't find a clean solution. But you... He looked at him with a mixture of pride and astonishment. You did it quietly without anyone even noticing. The next day during class, Mr. Rahim did something unusual. He called Arav to the front of the room. The class went silent instantly. Everyone looked up, surprised. Arav had never been called up before. Class, Mr. Rahim began. Yesterday we discussed a problem I said was too hard to solve. I want to tell you something. Someone in this room has solved it. The class started murmuring. Who? No way. Is it really solved? Mr. Rahim turned to Arav. Arav, would you like to explain it? Arav froze for a moment. His hands trembled slightly, but he nodded. He walked to the board, picked up a piece of chalk, and began to write slowly. The chalk squeaked lightly against the surface. Line by line, Arav rewrote the equation, then showed the steps, explaining in his soft, calm voice. At first, the class didn't understand. Then slowly, as he moved through each step, the pieces started to make sense. Even the students, who usually never paid attention, were silent now. Arav finished his explanation, turned around, and for the first time saw every face staring at him. Not in mockery, not in boredom, but in surprise. Mr. Rahim stepped forward and said, He's right. His solution works. It's elegant and original. I checked it twice, and it's correct. The room fell silent. Then one student whispered, No way. Arav did that? Another said, He actually solved it? Arav looked down, a little embarrassed, unsure how to react. He wasn't used to attention, but inside something warm spread through him. A quiet pride, not loud or showy, but deep and fulfilling. After class, a few classmates came to him, curious. Hey Arav, can you show me how you thought of that? One asked. Another said, I didn't even know that could be solved. That's crazy. For the first time, people were talking to him, not just around him, but Arav didn't think much of the fame. He just wanted to understand things. That was always enough for him. Later that afternoon, Mr. Rahim called him to the staff room. Arav entered nervously, clutching his notebook again. A few teachers were sitting there. Mr. Rahim introduced him to the others. This is the boy I told you about, he said proudly. He solved the equation we discussed last week. One of the teachers, a strict-looking woman, raised an eyebrow. A student solved that? Are you sure? Mr. Rahim handed over the notebook. See for yourself. The teachers passed it around, scanning the pages. A few frowned, a few nodded slowly. One of them, who taught physics, said, This isn't memorized. He's thinking in patterns. This is impressive. Arav stood there quietly, unsure what to do. Finally, Mr. Rahim smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. You've done something incredible, Arav. I'm going to send this to a friend of mine at the university. He's a professor of mathematics. I want him to take a look. Arav's eyes widened slightly. A professor? But sir, I'm just a student. Mr. Rahim laughed softly. You're a student, yes, but that doesn't make your mind any smaller. Sometimes big discoveries come from quiet places. That evening, when Arav returned home, his mother noticed something different in his face. You look happy today, she said while serving dinner. Arav smiled shyly. Sir liked my work. He said I solved something important. His father looked up from his plate. Really, that's wonderful, Beta. What did you solve? Arav tried to explain, but his parents didn't really understand the math. They just smiled and said, We're proud of you, son. It was a small moment, simple but beautiful. For a boy who had always lived quietly in his own world, finally, someone saw him. That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, The breeze from the window carried the faint sound of crickets outside. He thought about the next day, about what the professor might say when he saw his solution. He wasn't sure where all this would lead, but he felt a strange calm inside him, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, the quiet voice in his mind had been right all along. He didn't need to be loud to be heard. Sometimes, the truth speaks for itself, and his truth was written on those pages of numbers, waiting to be understood by the world. And as he drifted into sleep, Arav couldn't help but smile. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. 2 days passed quietly after Mr. Rahim sent Arav's work to his friend, Professor Mehta, a senior mathematics professor at a well-known university in the city. Arav didn't think much about it at first. He continued with his daily routine, attended classes, did his homework, and sat quietly at his usual spot in the classroom. But Mr. Rahim seemed more distracted than usual. Every time he checked his phone or opened his laptop, there was a certain expectation in his eyes, as if he was waiting for something important. Arav noticed but didn't ask. He didn't want to sound too eager. On the third day, something happened that Arav would never forget. Just before lunch break, a school peon entered the classroom and handed Mr. Rahim an envelope. The teacher opened it, scanned the letter inside, and looked up at Arav immediately. "Arav," he said, "come with me." The whole class turned to look. Arav hesitated, his mind filled with questions. Mr. Rahim gave him a reassuring smile. "It's all right, son. Just come." As they walked down the corridor, Arav felt his stomach twist with nervousness. His palms were slightly sweaty. He had no idea what was happening. When they reached the staff room, Mr. Rahim gestured for him to sit down. "Arav," he said slowly, "Professor Mehta received your notebook." Arav's eyes widened slightly. "He did?" Mr. Rahim nodded. "And he's coming here, today." Arav blinked in disbelief. "To the school?" "Yes," Mr. Rahim said with a proud smile. "He called this morning. He said your solution. It's not just correct. It's something special. He wants to meet you in person." Arav didn't know what to say. His heart thumped so loudly that it almost drowned out everything else. By noon, the entire school seemed to be buzzing with the news. Word spread quickly. "A university professor is coming to meet Arav." Some students who used to tease him were now whispering his name in curiosity and surprise. When the final bell before lunch rang, the classroom door opened. Mr. Rahim walked in, followed by a tall, dignified man with silver hair, wearing glasses and a calm, confident expression. It was Professor Mehta. The entire class stood up instinctively. Mr. Rahim gestured toward Arav. "Sir, this is the boy I told you about." Professor Mehta looked at Arav for a moment, then smiled warmly. "So, you're the quiet mathematician everyone's been talking about." Arav's face flushed slightly. "Sir, I don't know about that. I just like solving things." The professor chuckled. "That's exactly what makes you special." He opened his briefcase and pulled out Arav's notebook. "I read through your work last night. Your method, it's unique. You didn't just solve the problem. You created a new way of looking at it. Do you realize that?" Arav shook his head. "I just tried what made sense to me, sir." The professor's eyes softened. "Genius often looks like that. Simple logic that no one else thought of." The class watched in silent awe as the professor walked up to the board. "Let me show you what this young man has done," he said. He began to explain Arav's method step by step, just as Arav had written it. Each line, each transformation, each pattern of reasoning. As he spoke, the students began to see the beauty of it, how something so complex could be simplified so gracefully. Mr. Rahim stood near the window, his chest swelling with pride. When the professor finished, he turned back to Arav. "I'd like you to visit our university next week. We have a group of mathematics researchers working on complex equations, and I want them to see this." Arav's mouth fell slightly open. "Me visit the university?" "Yes," Professor Mehta said. "It's not an invitation we give to students your age, but what you've done deserves to be shared." For the first time, the classroom broke into quiet applause. It wasn't loud or exaggerated, it was genuine. Even the students who once laughed at Arav clapped, some smiling shyly, others simply nodding in respect. Arav felt his throat tighten with emotion. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and yet in that moment he realized it wasn't just about him. It was about the joy of finally being understood. After the class, the professor stayed for tea in the staff room with Mr. Rahim. Arav sat quietly beside them as they spoke. "I've seen students with potential before," said the professor, "but this boy, he's something different. His way of thinking reminds me of the great problem solvers, not just memorizing formulas but questioning why things work." Mr. Rahim smiled proudly. "He's always been quiet, sir. Never causes trouble. But he has a mind that never stops working." The professor looked at Arav. "Do you want to study mathematics in the future?" Arav nodded. "Yes, sir. I want to understand everything properly. Sometimes I feel like numbers have a language of their own." Professor Mehta smiled, impressed. "Keep that spirit alive. Curiosity is more important than intelligence." That evening, when Arav returned home, his parents were waiting. Mr. Rahim had already called them. His mother's eyes were teary with happiness. "A university professor came to your school?" she said, almost in disbelief. Arav nodded shyly. "He wants me to visit the university next week." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've made us proud, son. We always knew you were different. Quiet, yes, but focused." Arav smiled. It felt strange to hear those words, "and we're proud of you." He had always worked silently, never expecting recognition. But now it felt like all those nights of effort had finally meant something. The following week, Arav and Mr. Rahim took a bus to the city. It was Arav's first time visiting a large university. The buildings looked tall and modern, filled with students and professors moving about with purpose. Arav felt small among them, but also excited. They entered a lecture hall where several professors and students were waiting. Professor Mehta greeted them warmly. "Everyone," he said. "This is Arav, the young man I told you about." Arav felt nervous as they handed him a marker and asked him to explain his solution once again, this time to an audience of experts. His hands trembled slightly, but as soon as he saw the equation on the board, something inside him calmed. He began to explain, not like a performer, but like a thinker, step by step, clearly, patiently. The professors leaned forward, following each stage closely. Some began nodding halfway through. When he finished, there was silence for a few seconds, and then one of the professors said, "Remarkable. He's found a structural balance that simplifies an entire class of similar equations." Another added, "And he's only 15. Professor Mehta smiled. "Yes, 15 and self-taught in most of this." Arav looked down, his face flushed. "I just like understanding why things work," he murmured. After the session, the professors surrounded him with questions, compliments, and curiosity. One of them said, "If you continue thinking like this, you'll be doing research papers in a few years." That day, when Arav left the university, he felt something inside him shift. For the first time, he saw that his quiet curiosity could open doors to places he had only dreamed of. On the bus ride home, Mr. Rahim looked at him with pride. "See, Arav, you didn't need to be loud. You just needed to stay true to your thoughts. The world noticed on its own." Arav smiled softly. "I just wanted to understand it, sir." "That's all I ever wanted," Mr. Rahim nodded. "And that's why you'll go far. Real intelligence isn't about showing off. It's about never stopping the search for truth." As the sun set behind the city skyline, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Arav gazed out the window. He wasn't thinking about fame or recognition. He was thinking about the next question, the next mystery to explore. He knew deep down that this was just the beginning. Somewhere between his small-town classroom and that big university lecture hall, the quiet boy who once hid behind his notebooks had found something. Greater than a solution, he had found his purpose. The next few days passed like a dream for Arav. What began as a quiet curiosity in a classroom had now become something much bigger than he could ever have imagined. When he returned from the city university visit, his classmates looked at him differently. The boy who once sat alone at the back of the room now had everyone whispering about him, but this time in admiration. "Did you really go to the university?" one of them asked. "Is it true that professors were clapping for you?" said another. Arav smiled shyly and nodded, though he didn't say much. He didn't like attention, but deep down he felt happy. not because people were praising him, but because his work had finally made sense to someone else. Mr. Rahim, too, couldn't stop smiling that week. He proudly mentioned Arav's achievement in the morning assembly, saying, "Let Arav's story remind you all. It doesn't matter how loud you are. It matters how deeply you think." The students clapped, and for once, Arav felt proud standing there among them. But what happened next was something even Mr. Rahim hadn't expected. A week later, a local newspaper reporter came to the school. He introduced himself as Ravi from the City Chronicle and said he wanted to interview Arav. Mr. Rahim looked surprised. "You want to interview him?" The reporter smiled. "Sir, Professor Mehta mentioned the story at a university event. It caught people's attention. A 15-year-old solving an advanced equation, that's news." Arav's eyes widened. "News, but I'm just a student," Ravi chuckled. "That's exactly why people will love it. Come on, let's tell your story." The interview was short and simple. Ravi asked Arav about how he found interest in math, what made him keep working on that equation, and what he wanted to do next. Arav spoke honestly about how he didn't have fancy tools, how he worked late at night with old notebooks, and how Mr. Rahim encouraged him to never stop trying. The next morning, the newspaper printed the story with the headline, "Quiet Schoolboy Solves Equation That Stumped Even His Teacher. Local Genius Amazes Experts." The article featured a small photo of Arav standing in his classroom, holding his notebook. Beneath it, the text read, "Arav Sharma, a student of St. Thomas High School, has achieved what few thought possible. His unique approach to solving a complex mathematical problem has gained attention from university professors and educators alike." Within hours, people started talking about it. Parents, teachers, and even local shopkeepers mentioned the story. Arav's neighbors congratulated his family, saying how proud they must be. His father smiled modestly, saying, "He's always been a quiet boy, but his mind is strong." The following week, a small TV channel came to the school. They wanted to record a short interview. Mr. Rahim stood beside Arav, guiding him as the cameras rolled. The reporter asked, "Arav, how does it feel to have the whole town talking about your discovery?" Arav looked down for a moment, then said softly, "It feels nice, but I didn't do it for fame. I just wanted to understand why the equation didn't make sense. I think every question has an answer. You just have to keep looking." The simplicity in his words touched everyone. It wasn't the kind of answer they expected from a teenager. After the video aired, people began recognizing him on the streets. Some would stop him to shake his hand. Others would tell his parents how lucky they were to have such a gifted son. But even with all the attention, Arav stayed the same, quiet, humble, and focused. At school, he continued attending classes like before, taking notes, and helping classmates who asked him for help. But now even those who once teased him respected him deeply. Some of them even started studying harder, inspired by his story. One afternoon, as Arav sat in the library working on new problems, Mr. Rahim came in with a letter in his hand. His face was glowing. "Arav," he said excitedly. "You won't believe this." Arav looked up, curious. "What is it, sir?" Mr. Rahim handed him the letter. "It's from the National Mathematics Institute. They read about you in the papers. They want you to come to their annual science exhibition next month as a guest participant." Arav's eyes widened in disbelief. "Me? But I'm not even in college." "That's the point," Mr. Rahim laughed. "They want to meet the boy who made professors stop and think." Arav held the letter gently, his heart pounding with excitement. It was hard to believe that something he had done alone in his small room could reach people at such a high level. When he told his parents, they were overjoyed. His mother couldn't stop smiling. "Just think, Arav, you'll be representing our town. Everyone will know your name," Arav smiled. "I just hope I don't mess up, Amma." "You won't," his father said proudly. "You've already done more than enough to make us proud." The following weeks were filled with preparation. Mr. Rahim helped Arav create a clean version of his work to present at the exhibition. Neat charts, diagrams, and explanations written in clear handwriting. Arav stayed after school every day to work on it, making sure every detail was perfect. The day of the exhibition finally arrived. The event was held in a grand auditorium in the city, filled with students, teachers, and scientists from all over the country. The air buzzed with excitement. There were robots, science models, physics experiments, and then in one quiet corner, Arav's table, labeled Innovative Mathematical Approach by Arav Sharma. At first, not many people stopped by. They were more attracted to the loud, flashy projects, but as the day went on, a few mathematicians began reading his display carefully. Their expressions changed from casual curiosity to genuine amazement. "This is impressive," one of them said. "Who taught you this method?" Arav smiled politely. "No one, sir. I just tried to make sense of it in my own way." Soon more people gathered around. Some took notes. Others asked questions. Before long, his corner became one of the busiest spots in the exhibition. Professor Mehta, who was also attending, found Arav and smiled proudly. "I told you the world would notice your work one day." When the results were announced that evening, Arav's name was called out among the special recognition awards. The announcer said, "For demonstrating extraordinary independent thinking and originality at such a young age, this year's Special Innovation Award goes to Arav Sharma." The crowd clapped. The lights focused on him as he walked to the stage, his steps slow and uncertain. The applause grew louder, but inside, Arav felt calm. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was just grateful. As he received the certificate and medal, he looked toward the audience and spotted Mr. Rahim clapping proudly, tears glistening in his eyes. Arav smiled softly, knowing none of this would have happened without his teacher's faith in him. When they returned home that night, the town greeted him like a hero. Neighbors decorated his gate with garlands. Kids from the neighborhood ran up to him shouting, "Math genius! Math genius!" Arav laughed shyly, waving them off. But when the noise faded and the lights dimmed, he sat in his room again. The same small, quiet room where it all began. His medal lay beside his notebook, glinting faintly in the lamplight. He opened his notebook and began writing again. This time, not to solve something, but to think. He wrote down a single line, "Understanding is more powerful than knowing," and as he looked at the equation that had changed his life, he realized something deeper, that it wasn't the solution that mattered most, but the journey it took to reach it. Because in that journey, he had found not only an answer, but also his own voice. Quiet, steady, and now finally heard. That night after the celebration, Arav couldn't sleep. The cheers, the lights, the applause, they all echoed faintly in his head. But what stayed the most was the moment he looked into the crowd and saw Mr. Rahim smiling proudly. He turned toward his desk, where the medal and certificate rested beside his old, worn-out notebook. The pages were filled with numbers, symbols, and small notes scribbled in his handwriting, reminders of how far he had come. He smiled faintly. It all began here, just a simple curiosity in the corner of a classroom. Now, months later, people from all over the country knew his name. Newspapers called him the Quiet Genius. A few magazines even reached out to his school to feature his story. But despite all that attention, Arav never let it change him. He still walked to school every morning, sat in the same seat, and helped anyone who asked him for help with math. Still, things were not exactly the same. Arav's story had inspired other students to believe that even small beginnings could lead to something great. The math club that barely existed before was now full of eager students, and Arav was at the center of it, not as a leader, but as a quiet guide who always encouraged others to think differently. One afternoon, Mr. Rahim called him to the staff room. "Arav," he said warmly, "I got another letter for you." Arav blinked in surprise. "Another one?" Mr. Rahim nodded and handed him an envelope. The logo read National Institute of Science and Research. Arav opened it carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Inside, the letter said, "Dear Arav Sharma, after reviewing your innovative work presented at the National Exhibition, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to participate in our special summer mentorship program for young scientific minds. We believe your approach and curiosity represent the spirit of true learning. Congratulations." Arav's eyes widened. "Sir, they want me to join their mentorship program." Mr. Rahim grinned from ear to ear. "See, I told you your journey has just begun." The program was scheduled to take place during summer at a top institute in Delhi. It was a month-long camp where young talents from across the country would learn from some of the best scientists and mathematicians. When Arav told his parents, his mother teared up. "You're going to Delhi? Alone?" Arav nodded slowly. "Yes, Amma, but I'll call you every day." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go make us proud again. But remember, stay humble, always." That night, Arav packed his small suitcase. Just a few clothes, his notebook, and a pen. He didn't take much, but he carried something far more important: his curiosity and his heart. The train ride to Delhi was long and filled with thoughts. He watched the fields and towns blur past the window, thinking of how much his life had changed. The world outside seemed big, too big, but inside he felt calm. When he reached the institute, everything felt different from his small town. Tall buildings, busy roads, and bright lights everywhere. He looked around nervously until one of the program coordinators spotted him. "You must be Arav Sharma," she said with a smile. "Welcome to the mentorship program. We've been expecting you." He nodded shyly. "Thank you, ma'am." Over the next few weeks, Arav experienced things he had only read about. He attended lectures by scientists who had published research papers, worked in real laboratories, and met students his age who were just as passionate about learning. But what amazed everyone was Arav's way of thinking. He didn't always have the right answers, but his questions made people pause and think deeply. One professor even said, "Arav, you remind me of something important. That discovery isn't just about knowledge. It's about seeing things differently." For the first time in his life, Arav felt like he truly belonged, among people who loved learning as much as he did. During one quiet evening at the campus, he sat by the garden with his notebook open. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the buildings. Another student, Mira, sat beside him. "You know, you've become quite popular here," she said, smiling. "Everyone's talking about the boy who solved that impossible equation." Arav chuckled softly. "I didn't mean for that to happen. I just wanted to understand why it didn't make sense." "That's exactly why people admire you," she replied. "You're not chasing fame. You're chasing truth." Her words stayed with him long after that evening. When the program ended, Arav received a certificate of excellence and an invitation to return the next year as a student mentor. He couldn't believe it. His quiet passion for learning had opened doors he never even knew existed. Back home, when he stepped off the train, his parents were waiting at the station, beaming with pride. Mr. Rahim was there too, waving from a distance. Arav ran up to them, smiling. His mother hugged him tightly. "My little boy, you've grown so much." Mr. Rahim patted his shoulder. "Welcome back, genius. So how was the big city?" Arav grinned. "Loud, fast, but full of ideas." Mr. Rahim laughed. "That's what cities do. They teach you that knowledge never ends." Life gradually returned to normal, but Arav was different now. He began tutoring younger students, helping them not just with math, but with confidence. He told them that understanding something deeply was better than memorizing it quickly. He often repeated what Mr. Rahim once told him. Great minds are not always loud. Sometimes they're the quiet ones who listen before they speak. Years later, Arav would go on to study mathematics at a top university. But no matter how far he went, he never forgot his roots. The small classroom, the teacher who believed in him, and the equation that started it all. Whenever he came back to his hometown, he always visited St. Thomas High School. He'd sit in the same seat at the back of the class and smile at the memories that lived in those walls. Mr. Rahim, now older and slower, would greet him warmly every time. "So, Professor Arav," he'd say jokingly, "have you found another equation to trouble your teachers with?" Arav would laugh. "Not yet, sir, but I still love troubling the questions." And both of them would share that quiet laugh. The same kind of laugh that comes from understanding something deeper than words. One day, years later, when Arav was invited to speak at a major science conference, he stood on stage in front of hundreds of students. Cameras flashed, lights glowed, and the audience waited in silence. He looked around, smiled faintly, and began. "I used to be the quiet kid who sat at the back of the class. I wasn't the smartest or the most confident, but I had one thing, curiosity. I wanted to understand, not just to know, and I had a teacher who believed in me when no one else did. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that every great story begins with someone who keeps asking why." The audience erupted in applause. Some even had tears in their eyes. When the event ended, Arav quietly stepped off the stage just as he always had, humble, thoughtful, and grateful. That night, as he returned to his hotel room, he opened his old notebook again, the same one he had carried all those years. The pages were yellowed, but the equation still stood there, untouched. He smiled softly, whispering to himself, "Thank you for confusing me back then." He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and looked out the window at the city skyline. He wasn't just the quiet schoolboy anymore. He was a thinker, a teacher, a believer in endless questions. And somewhere deep inside, the same spark that began in a small classroom was still alive. Calm, steady, and shining brighter than ever. Because sometimes, the quietest minds make the loudest difference in the world. Years passed. Seasons changed. And time carried everyone forward, quietly, steadily, like a river that never stops. Arav was no longer the shy boy sitting in the back of a small classroom. He had become a respected mathematician, known for his gentle voice and his rare ability to explain the most complicated ideas in the simplest way possible. Yet, no matter how far life took him, across cities, universities, and countries, his heart never left that one small school where it all began. He often said, "Every great story starts in a small room with a single question." Now, years later, he found himself standing once again at the old gates of St. Thomas High School. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The same rusted gate creaked open, and the smell of chalk and dust greeted him like an old memory. It had been almost 15 years since he last walked those corridors, but the echoes of laughter, the whispers of his classmates, and the voice of Mr. Rahim still lived there. Arav smiled softly and whispered to himself, "It still feels the same." Inside, things had changed, new classrooms, new teachers, and new students who had only heard his name in stories. But when they saw him walk in, wearing his simple gray shirt and glasses, the principal hurried over. "Sir, you came. We didn't think you'd actually make it." Arav smiled modestly. "How could I not? This place gave me everything." The school had invited him as the chief guest for their annual science fair, the same event that once inspired him as a child. It felt poetic, almost as if life had come full circle. As he walked through the school grounds, he saw rows of tables where children displayed their projects, paper volcanoes, electric circuits, tiny robots, and colorful charts. Their eyes were full of excitement, just like his had been once. He stopped at one table where a quiet boy stood nervously beside a half-finished display of numbers and formulas. Arav leaned closer and asked, "What's this?" The boy stammered, "It's, an equation I've been trying to solve. But I think I did something wrong. It doesn't make sense anymore." Arav smiled gently. "Mind if I take a look?" The boy nodded, handing him the sheet. Arav studied it carefully, then said softly, "You didn't do anything wrong. You just asked a question most people would walk away from. That's bravery." The boy blinked, confused. "Bravery?" "Yes," Arav said, looking at him kindly. "Not everyone dares to face confusion. Most people stop when things get hard. But if you keep looking long enough, even confusion will show you the truth." The boy's eyes widened. "You sound like my teacher," Arav chuckled. "Maybe your teacher and I learned from the same place." He patted the boy's shoulder and moved on, his heart full. Later, when the event began, Arav was invited on stage. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, and teachers. The walls were decorated with posters that read, "Believe in your ideas. Even the quietest voice can change the world." He took the microphone, looked at the sea of young faces before him, and began, his tone calm, warm, and filled with emotion. "I once sat where you are sitting now," he said. "I wasn't confident. I didn't think I was special. I was just curious and a little stubborn. I wanted to understand things that didn't make sense to me. People often think genius is about knowing everything. It's not. It's about not giving up when nothing makes sense." He paused, his eyes softening as he continued. "I had a teacher who believed in me when even I didn't. He told me something I never forgot. Don't rush to find the answer. First fall in love with the question." That one line changed my life. The hall was silent. Even the restless students in the back listened intently. Arav smiled faintly. "And if any of you ever feel invisible or think your voice doesn't matter, remember this. Great things are often built in silence. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You just need to keep trying." When he finished, the crowd burst into applause. The principal thanked him and presented him with a small plaque that read, "To our own inspiration, Arav Sharma, the boy who believed." As the ceremony ended, Arav quietly walked toward the old classroom, the one where it had all begun. The room was empty now, quiet except for the faint sound of wind against the window. He walked to the last bench, sat down, and looked at the chalkboard. For a moment, everything felt just as it had years ago. The soft hum of the ceiling fan, the smell of chalk, and that same feeling of curiosity stirring inside him. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, sir." It was as if, somewhere in that room, Mr. Rahim's gentle voice still lingered, calm and patient. When he opened his eyes, he noticed a small plaque on the wall that read, "In memory of Mr. Rahim Khan, a teacher who believed in the quiet ones." A lump formed in Arav's throat. He hadn't realized how much he missed that man, his guidance, his kindness, his faith. He stood there for a long moment, his eyes glistening. Then he picked up a piece of chalk from the desk and wrote on the board, "Understanding is more powerful than knowing." He stepped back and smiled. The words glowed faintly in the afternoon light, the same words he had written years ago in his notebook, now resting on the very wall that shaped him. When he left the classroom, he didn't look back. But somehow he knew. The story had come full circle. Outside, the students were still buzzing around, laughing and discussing their projects. The young boy from earlier ran up to him, holding his sheet of equations. "Sir, I think I figured it out," the boy said, panting with excitement. Arav smiled warmly. "See? I told you, confusion always hides the answer." The boy grinned proudly, and for a moment Arav saw a reflection of his younger self in those bright eyes. Curious, hopeful, and full of quiet determination. He patted the boy's head gently. "Never stop asking why. That's how everything begins." As Arav walked out of the school gates, the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows on the ground. The breeze was soft, and the air smelled faintly of chalk dust and dreams. He took one last look at the old building, the walls that had witnessed his struggles, his questions, and his first victory, and whispered softly, "Goodbye, and thank you." Then he turned and walked away, carrying with him not just memories, but a legacy, the kind that lives on quietly in every student who dares to wonder. Because somewhere in every classroom, there's always another quiet child, looking at a question that doesn't make sense, and beginning a story that just might change the world again.